I think one of the things I wanted to talk about was, Star Trek has a real tradition of diversity, which is great. It's a wonderful thing, and I think it's a very important part of the franchise. I think Deep Space Nine, interestingly, was one of the few in which not only do we have a diverse cast, but we actually talked about race, which the other shows didn't really do. In that there were no stories about what it meant for Uhura or Geordi to be black. There were no stories really addressing the cultural heritage of Sulu, particularly. And so, or Harry, or any. I don't think, I could be wrong. Maybe Harry Kim got his moments, but I felt like on Deep Space Nine, probably at least partially because of Avery being a little bit more insistent on it, but I think also because of where Michael and Ira's heads were at, we actually got to explore those issues more. In episodes like Far Beyond the Stars, or even Bada Bing Bada Boom, or like a lot of the episodes, we got to have a little bit more of that be present. And I just wanted to sort of ask you guys how you felt about it. I mean, Sid, I don't know. I mean, you were a groundbreaking face for television at the time, for sure, right? I mean, and I don't think we've ever talked about it. So I just was wondering what you thought about it, what Sirach thought about it, what Hannah thought about it. Armin and I talked a little bit about like the Ferengi and the controversy around, their what if they were standing in for specific. Yeah, if they were standing in for a specific ethnic group. Spoiler alert.
Yes.
No. Well, yes, Europeans, but Americans. But obviously there are other theories. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I thought it could be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it is an interesting discussion. Where are you on that, Cyril? I mean, you were a young man, but you came up under Avery's wing, and Avery was probably the most vociferous activist for certainly for racial issues. What was your aftertaste? How did it feel at the end of the whole thing? Where did you end up?
Yeah, well, now as I review the show, I see different things about like what Robert's talking about, how they address race, and it's interesting for me to watch it now. One particular episode that's coming out to mind, Ryan, is the one where Cisco is inside of the cage. Do you guys remember that episode?
Second
Robert?
season, yeah.
It's the second season.
Yeah,
where,
Paradise. Paradise?
Right. And they kept trying to have him remove his uniform, and that cage, though, was so poignant.
Yes.
That box.
And that box. And he was, there was a scene in which he was, he volunteered to go back into the box because he knew that was where they were going to put him, but he walked in there on his own. And watching the scene was difficult for me because I understood that is somebody's real story. Somebody really had to live that kind of humiliation and that kind of degradation. So that was really emotional for me to watch Cisco crawl into that little box and be treated, in this slave kind of way. But what is remarkable about the show, and what I'm especially happy about, is that we had this representation of black men, in particular, in my case with the Ciscos, that were articulate, that were educated, that were really
leaders.
Yeah, they were, and part of the vision of a future where black people could see themselves in the future and in that positive light. And I think Avery carried the weight of that because his activism is long and his struggle is real. And he comes from these times, and he comes from the era of having to really tackle such things here in America. So it was something that he wore heavy on his shoulders. Now, I didn't grow up the same way. I didn't grow up during the same time. I had a more multinational, multicultural upbringing in West Hollywood. And so I didn't face the same things that he faced. I didn't face the same things that my father faced. but I understand the importance of it, and I understand the significance of being just treated like a human being with respect, and also being seen for something other than just the color, but who you are as a person in your mind and your aspirations, your intellect. And so I think that what this show did, what Deep Space Nine did, was give us a chance to be that representation, and I'm really grateful for that. Robert, the stories that you guys wrote, Ira, um, Michael Pillar, everybody who took the time to tell these stories, because oftentimes we're marginalized. These stories about Black people are really confined into a certain box of stereotype. But, he's the this, he's the that, he's the this. But to see somebody who's a captain or a commander and a lead in a leadership position, this is before Obama was president. So I don't think we hadn't seen a Black leader of this magnitude uh, on a consistent basis, who was intelligent and articulate, on screen. So I believe that, in some ways it was part of the paving of the way for somebody like Obama to be accepted and to be, um, seen as somebody that could do the job.
Great, great. Yeah, that's really wise. I mean, I think very simple. I don't know if anyone has a follow up to it.
I had one follow up, which the one thing I also wanted to talk about real quickly with you, Sirach, is how important it was for Avery to show that great father son relationship, to show an African American father and son who had this really strong bond that was full of love, and like the love was so genuine, it came across, of course. I think that was very, very important to him. In the same way, even more, but in the sort of in the same neighborhood, where it was very important to him that his love interest be African American, or Black. But I just thought that was really a beautiful thing,
Yeah.
and that was a lot of that was Avery. I have to give him a ton of credit.
Yeah, and I want to just to follow up on that. Why is it important? Because the absence of the Black males in the family household is a reality that we deal with as a culture. So Black people have, have more likelihood to grow up in a household where their father is not present. And I think that in itself was one of the major catalysts for Avery having so much significance and putting so much um, onus on being a Black father, being present in his child's life, making sure that he's there to provide the kind of guidance and upbringing that would make him a young man and turn him to another Black man who was had the advantage of that. And that's another thing that you did well, as far as showing three generations of Black people on screen, with my grandfather played by Brock Peters. So
Yes.
now you see the line. You see, okay, well, if you have a Black father in the household, then that person is more likely to be successful. That person is more likely to accomplish their goals, and then that would just transfer over to me on the third generation of that totem pole. So I think that meant a lot to Avery to counter the narrative that Black people were absent in the household, and counter the narrative that Black people are a certain kind of stereotype. And those things are the things that meant most to him.
I just want to follow up on that real quick, because I think one of the other things that we were conscious of, I think, or at least I was conscious of, I can't speak for everyone, was that one of the Sisko family story is a success story in that Sisko's father was a restaurateur, right? He wasn't Starfleet. He wasn't like he ran a nice little restaurant in New Orleans, right? And then his son is a Starfleet captain, and that man's son is a celebrated novelist, at least in one version of the future. And this is a story about a family that is, even in the weird whatever post-class world of Star Trek, it's a family that is sort of ascending on the ascent, partially because of what you were just saying, partially because they had such a strong family bond that's passing from generation to generation. It means each generation is lifting the next.
Absolutely, and that's how we got here. Remember that those of us in our past, our relatives, that were struggling through slavery and struggling through Jim Crow and oppression. Those people had to have a vision of a better day for them to persevere through that time that they went through. So those slaves in those days on the plantation must have known that there would be a day that their children's children would not have to go through that, and that they would have the ability to have the privileges of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it is their struggle that we build on, and we build on as time goes on, and that's the progression of it. And that's also why it was important for Avery to have this future version of something to look forward to. It is the future that we're always trying to see a better version of ourselves and leave better off than what we inherited.
And that's why he took the job, right? I mean, that actually is specifically why he took the job, because he wanted to be that representation for young Black children to be able to watch someone on TV that was a starship captain, that was the hero of the show. That's correct, right? I remember him talking about that.
That is correct. That's why he took the job. That's why he was passionate about it. That was what got him up every day, because he understood that the legacy was there. I mean, since then, it's been 25 years or 20 years since it was off the air. And before, I can't think of a show that featured Black family in a positive, non-comical light. It still doesn't exist, really. That in a positive, non-comical light.
This Is Us, maybe, but it's
I was going to say,
Right.
This Is Us does a great job with that, but that is a top-notch written
third
show.
or a quarter of the show.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But yeah.
So that's how few and far between it is. I mean, it's not like, oh yeah, that one and this one and that one and this. It's not that many to choose from. And even in that This Is Us, remember, that's kind of a slightly dysfunctional relationship. It wasn't a functional father-son relationship that they had. His father abandoned him and they rekindled and reconnected. There were reasons for that, but it wasn't a father who was present in his children's lives.
It's more, I'm talking about the next generation down for sure. But it didn't have the same level of like 3 generations of sort of functional, like really tight and wonderful family people working together to make everything better for each other.
And may I ask, was this a function of the writing, or was this something that Avery asked for?
From my point of view, it was both. It was definitely something Avery asked for, 100%. Like Avery was like, I need to have scenes with my son. I mean, that's how he referred to Sirach. It was my son. It wasn't Sirach. It wasn't it wasn't Jake. It was my son. And I think that was something we as a staff embraced. But it was also Michael from the very beginning wanting to tell a father-son story. I mean, that was the inspiration. That was the key emotional relationship for Michael the whole time. Like, that was Michael's inspiration. This is The Rifleman, which is a show about a father raising his son on the frontier, right? That's where he was coming from. And I think Michael, had some issues with his father and was really dedicated to telling a story about a good father-son relationship, which he tried to enact in his own life with his kids. It was important to me because I had not the opposite experience. My father was absent. And so although interestingly, like my family line is trucker, Army colonel, writer. It's actually a very reflective, like social structure. But for me, it was, I wanted to portray this relationship because I think I was kind of trying to write a relationship I wish I'd had. And I can't speak. I think Ira did have a really good relationship with his dad. Renee, I know, has a really good relationship with his father. And so, Ron, I don't think we ever really talked about it enough. But so I think it's something like father-son issues or something that obviously is transcultural, but ultimately, like, I think the importance of it to Avery was very strong. And it just was in our heads all the time. Like, we got to get some moments for them together. Also, they were great. Like, the other thing that I've talked about this before, I think, but writers are really selfish, and we want to write what works. And so if something is great, we're going to write more of it. The fact that Hannah's character got lines and moments, that doesn't happen a lot with young actors. It's because she was good and they were charming, lovely moments. but we knew if we wrote moments for Avery and Sirach, they would be spectacular, and so that's why we wrote more of them. Well, let's write more stuff for Armin and Max and Aaron. Let's write stuff for Sid and Terry and Andy. You know, like we sort of identified like scenes that we knew would work, moments and pairings that we knew would work because we were writing so fast, and so we would often like sort of double down on those kind of scenes.
You did a really good job with Avery and Sirach, and it's a very delicate thing to bring up race, to allude to it in a utopian show, a show that is 400 years later when all this has been rinsed away, when there is no color. And, in a way you could have fallen into a trap of really breaking a cardinal law of good sci-fi, and that is over-egging contemporary issues and projecting them into the future when that future might have dealt with it very differently. But you were smart, in my view, because you had the character of Bashir, who was really seen as colorless, and he was, and so he really was the product of the future, and he was just a Starfleet officer, Starfleet medical, and he wasn't. He was. I think you must have gone out of your way to make sure that his cultural heritage was not explored, was not unearthed. It wasn't interesting enough.
Well, let's talk about a very specific example of that where you corrected us on that. There was a moment where we had to come up with Julian's full name. I can't remember why, but the original name that we came up with was something like Julian Saladin Bashir, I think, or maybe it was Malik or something like that. And Sid came back and said, I have a request. Please, please, please. Can you make the middle name something to further muddy the waters about Julian's ethnic background? Remember that?
Yeah.
And so the middle name we gave him, Subutai, is a Mongol name, which weirdly kind of prefigured Khan, but the whole Khan thing. But basically, like, that was purposeful. We actually, because Sid said, "Hey, don't do this. Don't give him two Middle Eastern names and a European name. Give him a third name that is even more like further afield."
It was really important to me because of the fact that we live in a society, and don't forget that the Rodney King riots had happened just weeks before we started filming, and in many cases, a bit like the situation right now, the atmosphere was febrile. And your blackness walks in before you, and that's really a terrible position to be in for a person. And it just seemed like we could do better. And for Avery had his own agenda, which was actually really coherent and beautifully thought out. I was nowhere near as smart as that, so I did not want to take on that subject, and I really liked the idea of becoming just a person and not being a black person or an Arab person or a brown person. One day we will see in America where all Americans are just Americans. They're not Italian American or African American. They have no substrata that they've got to deal with. We've got to shuffle through to feel sympathy for. At least I hope that they don't. I think that we'll always remember what has happened here. In the United States, that is, for those people living in America, and certainly around the world. But I do hope that one day our Jewishness, our blackness, these things become just normal about us, and sources of pride and interaction between
people. 100%. It's interesting for us as writers because we just wrote Bashir as English. that was it. Like, what in our mind it was like this is an Englishman. Clearly, listen to him. And so we just embraced the Englishness a little, like not to like we didn't go deep into it.
Well, you did by giving me the relationship with O'Brien, because that's such an archetypal duo.
Well, of course, the Irishman and the Englishman.
There you go.
And all that. Like, I'll tell you something that I do see people talk about on the internet. Why would O'Brien sing Jerusalem? Like in what world?
We just saw that, Srock. I was going to
does
bring
an
that up.
Irishman in any circumstances sing Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Even if, why would he do that?
Yeah.
Can you tell us the story of that? You remember the story of how you guys came, why it came to Jerusalem?
It can't have been me.
I think it was Calm. So here's the story from my point of view. Originally, they were supposed to sing Space Oddity. We couldn't get the rights. And then we tried to get the rights to Rocket Man, which also would have been great.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't get the rights, or they were too expensive. You know, it wasn't that we couldn't get them. It's just that, like, you know, David Bowie wanted, like, at the time, like, you know, more money than we would pay like the entire guest cast. And the same thing with Elton John. And so we were at a loss. We were like, we need these two guys to sing a song to bond in this moment, and we have no idea what they should sing. And someone said, well, just make it something traditional that's free. I'm like, what should they sing? And I think we asked Colm and you, what should they sing? And I think it was Colm's idea.
I just wouldn't have had the temerity to have told Colin what to say. He outranked me as a human being, as an actor, as just about everything.
And so the thing, I don't know, maybe Jerusalem is a specifically English hymn, and it's sung in the sort of Anglican church, and it's very much a song of the estate.
The great colonizer.
The great empire. It's an imperial song.
It's an imperial colonial
song.
It's absolutely about people bending to the British.
100%. And specifically, sometimes those people were Sudanese, but sometimes they were also Irish. and
there we go. We both of us ex-colonies.
100%. And so
it's a beautiful.
It's a beautiful moment, and it's such a great moment, and it's just such an interesting choice that he made. And I think his argument was it's a song they would both know, like however they feel about it politically, it's a song they would both know, and that's why he chose it. I think.
Yeah,
I wish I could remember the whole thing, but it was an interesting moment, you know.